Hello and welcome to today's webinar. The topic of today is Untangling the Global Attack Surface. This event is presented in partnership thanks to our friends at Palo Alto Networks and Unit 42. We've got a great event, very insightful event lined up for you today with tons of security statistics and details that you need to be aware of. Before we get started, there's just a few things that you should know about the webinar. My name is David Davis of Actual Tech Media, and I'll be serving as the host and moderator. As always, we want these events to be educational. We want to help you to solve your security challenges before it's too late. And so we encourage your questions here in the questions pane of the audience console. Right there, you should see a pane, a window, if you will, in your console, one labeled handouts, and right next to that is the word questions. I see many of you already saying greetings and salutations, hello and good morning, good afternoon from across the United States and around the world, and we love to see that. But we also want your technical questions because we will be doing a live Q&A session at the end of the event, and we even have a best question prize, which I'll talk about here in just a moment. But first, I do want to encourage you to also check out the handouts tab. It's there that you'll find one URL, which will take you to the Attack Surface Management Top 10 Use Cases Reg page. You need to check that out. This is for an upcoming event happening in December. And this is where you can find out a lot more details about advanced attack surface management. So make sure that you check out that webinar. And then there are two handouts that you can download. One is the Attack Surface Management for Dummies guide, as well as the 2023 Attack Surface Threat Report, which you'll be learning a lot more about on today's webinar. Now, at the end of the webinar today, I'll be announcing the winner of our Amazon $250 gift card prize. If you're watching this on demand or recorded, of course, that drawing would have already occurred. The prize terms and conditions can be found right there in the handouts tab of your audience console. And then, as I mentioned, we also have a best question prize that we're running today. So if you have a question on the topic of the day, get it in. We'll be checking out the best questions and voting on those after the event and sending out a $50 Amazon gift card to what we feel is the best question that was asked during the webinar. All right, so with that housekeeping and information out of the way, I'm excited now to bring in today's expert presenters. You'll be hearing a lot more from all three of these folks, during today's presentation. So just a brief introduction to each one of them. Abhi, who's a product marketing manager at Palo Alto Networks. Ross, who's a senior consulting director at Unit 42 from Palo Alto Networks. And Matt Craning, who is a chief technology officer, also from Palo Alto Networks. And I'm going to hand it off to Abhi, and he'll do some more in-depth introductions with each of our presenters. So with that, take it away, Abhi.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Today, we're going to go over some of the major findings from the 2023 Unit 42 Attack Surface Threat Report. In this report, there are findings from expert analysis of exposures from over 250 plus organizations across the world, covering a time period of 12 months. My name is Abhi. I work in product marketing for Cortex Xpanse. And today I have with me Dr. Matt Craning and Ross Warden. Matt, could you please go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Matt Craning. I'm the co-founder and CTO of Xpanse, which created the Attack Surface Management product category.
Ross, could you please introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Ross Warden. I'm a senior consulting director here at Unit 42, where I lead large incident response engagements and innovate new product offerings for our clients.
Thank you both so much for taking the time and being here with us today. Matt, one of the first things that jumps out in the report is that it is based on observed data. What is this data, and how does the team get access to this data?
That's a great question, Abhi. To create our products, Xpanse operates a public data collection infrastructure from hundreds of points around the world on the public internet. And every day, we actually gather over 500 billion different pieces of information about all internet connected systems. And we use that information primarily for two purposes: to attribute if a system is potentially risky or vulnerable, and also to attribute it to an organization. And that's where this data comes from. So by looking at all internet connected systems, we can then look at in this report over 250 organizations, see every asset that they have that is directly on the public internet, and if it is in a risky or
That's excellent, Matt. This entire report is based on actual exposure data. And so one of the findings that was a bit concerning is how the constant change in the cloud is essentially resulting in lots of exposures. I think the stat on the report was nearly 50% of all new high critical exposures that arise in any given month are on account of this massive change in the cloud. Can you talk a little bit about it? What do we mean by cloud flux? Why does it change so frequently?
Not a problem. So when we look at the cloud, we look at every single service that an organization has in a hosting provider that is not in their own on-premises data centers. Mm-hmm. And this covers both things that they know about, such as accounts in known AWS and known Azure. But one of the largest differences is the accounts that companies have through traditional CSPs that they know about are only a fraction of where they actually have cloud presence, because anyone in the organization with a P card can actually become an IT systems administrator in 5 minutes if they want to. And it's the ease with which new IT can be spun up anywhere in the world by nearly anyone in the organization that leads to a substantially higher number of systems for organizations being in the cloud, being created in daily and even hourly basis. And that's what our report indicates is actually where more than half of their most severe risks lie, is in these new software-based systems, less so in on-prem, though there are still risks there as well.
Matt, thank you for that. Ross, you have responded to several critical incidents across organizations. In your time, how often have you seen a cloud misconfiguration leading to an unknown or potentially unmanaged exposure across these engagements?
Absolutely. The answer is a staggering amount and an unfortunate amount. We really work with our clients to try and get them ahead of these kinds of incidents because they are preventable. It's often a simple switch that you just toggle off and your environment is much safer because you've done that. But when you don't know that that cloud environment exists because, like Matt said, somebody decided, hey, I just need some new infrastructure. I'm going to get my company card and go spin up an AWS account. That can be devastating, especially if you think of embedding, secrets and keys and connections to your backend databases. What seems like an innocent, cloud environment that was stood up for a perfectly good reason, but not in a compliant way, can lead to devastating results for the entire enterprise.
Thank you. And on the topic of responding to incidents, one of the startling discoveries in this report is the eye-popping pace at which attackers are exploiting exposures when a new zero-day comes out. I think the stat in the report was there were certain remote code exploit vulnerabilities which were exploited within hours of them being disclosed publicly. Matt, how are attackers finding these exposures so quickly?
So when a zero day is created and kind of dropped on the community publicly, what we're actually seeing is that attackers can now utilize simple, widely available internet scanning technologies for cost of at most a few hundreds of dollars, enumerate every single vulnerable internet system. Previously, they would have had to kind of choose targets of choice. And they would have been focused on particular networks, done more intense reconnaissance of those. Due to automation technologies that are now freely available and easily downloadable by anyone, including malicious actors, every single system that's vulnerable becomes a target of opportunity, because once you have exploit code, launching it against every single internet connected system is very low cost and very highly automatable by attackers. That's why we're seeing these attacks scale from one code exploit to attempting to exploit every single vulnerable system on the internet within hours.
So they're being opportunistic when an opportunity presents itself. Ross, when you are called into such situations, what's the first thing you do as an incident response expert?
Sure. I think it's important here to distinguish. Historically, the first thing we would always do is gather as much telemetry as we could internally about the client's environment. Do we have authentication logs, authorization logs, et cetera? And we still do that. But now, with tools like Expanse, we are able to simultaneously kick off an outside-in view that we then marry up with the inside-out view, and that often results in us finding, patient zero or the initial infection vector, that kind of thing, much more quickly. And even if it doesn't, we may find other vulnerabilities that other attackers are trying to break into while we're responding to the first incident. So having that inside out and outside in view in tandem is critical for us.
Matt, how important is visibility when organizations want to immediately respond to these internet-wide emergencies?
Visibility and inventory is foundational in any response. If you don't have a complete, current, and accurate inventory, which unfortunately is the case for most organizations in the world, you're doing firefighting with Microsoft Office, traditionally Microsoft Excel and Microsoft Outlook. And those are great tools, but they're not actually designed for security effectiveness. And what this really manifests as a lot of wasted time and wasted effort just at when you're most vulnerable, because you don't know both all of the assets you have that might be vulnerable. It's also difficult to validate, even if somebody has fixed a fraction of the assets you have that might be vulnerable, if that is actually getting propagated and centrally maintained, so that it becomes a game of telephone just at when an organization is its most vulnerable. They actually lack the tools and the processes to efficiently and effectively solve the problem. And what this ultimately leads to is both very high labor costs, but also a remediation timeline that can take weeks and even months in certain cases, as opposed to days or hours, which is the time speeds with which attackers operate.
Right. 0 days are one thing. At least organizations have an idea of what they're looking for. But one of the other things that this report highlights is how there are several exposures, many of them offering very little resistance and lots of opportunities for attackers to essentially breach an organization. I think the leading attack surface exposure that this report highlights in the last 12 months is something called Web Framework Takeover Exposures. Matt, can you talk a little bit about what a Web Framework Takeover Exposure is and why it is particularly bad for organizations that have these exposures?
Sure. So web frameworks such as jQuery, PHP, are very common components used in web servers that are by far the most prevalent asset for organizations. And why these are risky is that they're very frequently checked by attackers for vulnerabilities. And web servers are very frequently exposed to the internet intentionally by organizations. However, when they're not updated, frequently because they might not be centrally tracked, then you have assets out there on the internet that anyone in the world can talk with and interact with, including in malicious ways, but which is not necessarily receiving all of your security patches. And it's this perfect storm of, as we've seen with digital transformation, organizations have more and more things online, just as attackers are checking more and more for these kinds of risks.
That's very interesting, Matt. One of the other risks that I saw in this report that I wanted to talk a little bit about was remote access risks. Nearly 1 out of every 5 exposure that the team looked at was related to some sort of remote access service being accessible publicly on the internet by pretty much anyone and everyone. Can you tell us a little bit about what is a remote access service and why is exposing this really bad?
Absolutely. Remote access services in general are largely efficiency tools that IT teams use to address problems remotely. So if anyone's ever had a problem with their own laptop and asked IT to come in and address the problem, in most cases, it's not a physical person coming over to your desk, or these days coming and paying you a home visit. It's actually them using software that is installed on your laptop to remotely administer your system, do legitimate things, help make your system better and improve these. However, unfortunately, most of these technologies, one of the most prevalent is something called Remote Desktop Protocol, or RDP, were designed to really only be exposed in trusted environments that had a lot of legacy assumptions, such as being on an enterprise network in a protected enclave. And with both the rise of remote work and just the number of different ways these systems can manifest on the internet, very frequently, we find that these systems that are designed for legitimate IT people to help the organization are exposed in ways that they were not intended to be. Attackers can take advantage of them because these systems are generally not designed with security in mind. And when exploited, they give very deep administrative access to the system in question, allowing the attacker to effectively masquerade as a legitimate IT administrator, which is very concerning.
Right. And Ross, on that point, I was looking at one of the older incident response reports, and it said that in nearly 50% of the cases, they found that such systems did not have multi-factor authentication or any sort of security settings for that matter enabled. Is this normal? Do you see this across your IR engagements?
Unfortunately, it is normal. And I think echoing what Matt said, the goal with a lot of these tools is really, if you think of confidentiality, integrity, and availability, the goal is availability, right? You want a quick and easy way to get in to help your people do their jobs. And that's a good thing. However, when they aren't properly secured or they are stood up in a temporary way, we say that there's nothing more permanent than the temporary, right? You stand something up temporarily, you never take it down, you forget, that gets exploited later on. And in cloud environments too, you may say stand up a telnet server and leave it running, and somebody else might change the access controls to your environment and expose your telnet server without you knowing it. So yes, we see this quite frequently, and we tell people that it is critical when you're going to expose a service like this, that you do it intentionally, that you really examine whether you have to, how you're going to do it, and how you're going to turn it back off once you're done, so it's not left hanging out there on the internet.
Right, that's extremely concerning, especially when you look at the report and it found that over 85% of the organizations that they looked at had some form of remote access service exposed to the public internet. Matt, Ross said it's very important to be intentional about exposing these services. What are some potential reasons that these services are being exposed, perhaps accidentally or otherwise?
When we talk with customers after finding these systems online, helping them do a remediation and then identify the root cause, very frequently and very concerningly, in many cases, these are employee laptops that are actually directly on the public internet. And by this, we mean not that they're at someone's home behind a router, behind a NAT, but that actually anyone in the world could send packets directly to that employee laptop. And the way that laptops are configured were never to be directly internet accessible, because there are systems that IT teams install like RDP that allow them on a protected enclave to log in naturally. But when that laptop is taken outside of that enclave and insecurely connected to the public internet, then you have many, many, many employees in a very heterogeneous networking environment that none of their laptops were configured to be in. And that is actually the root cause of most of these exposures, is taking assets from one environment, putting them in another, which unfortunately exposes them to every single attacker in the world.
Interesting. Thank you, Matt. For those of you listening, if you want to look at the stats, if you want to understand the details and the potential impact, I would highly recommend that you download the latest 2023 Unit 42 Attack Surface Threat Report. You should be able to find a link to it in the resources section. If not, you can go to paloaltonetworks.com and find a copy of it there. Matt, jumping back into the report, one of the other interesting findings was about how 80% of all attack surface exposures were found in the cloud. Now, why is there such a large concentration of attack surface exposures in the cloud?
Based on our findings, based on talking with our customers about the root causes of why we find 80% of our exposures in the cloud, our view is it comes down to the cloud offers both a lot of leverage, but also a lot of single points of failure around individual developers, and in particular, individual developers doing things outside of sanction controls. So let's take an example with on-prem. You have to have a number of checks. Systems have to be physically provisioned. There are a number of different teams involved. It's very hard for one individual person to create and expose 1,000 systems to the internet. In contrast, in cloud, if just one engineer or contractor has a purchasing card, if they want to, they can actually stand up a number of systems on their own very quickly in software. And it's also very easy for them to both inadvertently scale that number very high, again, because it's one click with software. So that's what we found, is that it's typically not teams doing known things that are experienced with cloud in known environments. It is instead the fact that inexperienced developers can do very large scale activities, including outside of sanctioned environments. And that multiplies across your entire organization. That is the best explanation we found as the root cause of that statistic.
Right. Ross, staying on this cloud attack surface, one of the things that the research team found was that nearly 90% of these exposures that they found in the cloud attack surface were related to end-of-life services and systems. How common is it for opportunistic attackers to go after these end-of-life systems?
Yeah, thanks, Abhi. So this is really a combination of two trends that we've seen. One is a migration to cloud, which offers all kinds of opportunities and modernization opportunities as well. The other is that end-of-life systems, legacy systems that are in on-prem environments may simply be what we call lifted and shifted into a cloud environment. They might not be adequately secured, upgraded, et cetera. But many times developers and IT teams think, well, because they're in the cloud, things are in better shape. And they might be in terms of availability, but they might not be in terms of security. Again, it comes down to intentionality here. So when you look at the ease with which a simple misconfiguration in a cloud environment can cause a lot of problems, and the tendency for individuals to put older systems in a cloud environment, think that they're okay, you get this sort of nightmare scenario where you've got an end-of-life system that is just low-hanging fruit for an attacker in an environment with maybe not as many controls as developers and IT staff are used to in an on-prem world. And that leads to us seeing these systems attacked aggressively, frequently, and across geographies and industries.
Matt, what are some of the reasons why we're seeing so many end-of-life systems on the cloud attack surface? I mean, clearly organizations understand that these services no longer are supported, so they should ideally be taking them off the internet. What are some ways in which they continue to remain on the internet?
The largest way that we found end-of-life systems remain in cloud environments is that they're actually part of the software configuration baselines of organizations. And thus, when they get deployed, end-of-life software is actually copied across the organization in an insecure way. This shows both the promise and the peril of going to more cloud-based software configurations. For an on-prem world where you have both hardware and software being run and deployed, you tend to do migrations and upgrades in a piecemeal way over time. So usually some fraction of your systems will be older, some fraction will be newer. In cloud, because of common software baselines and the ability to reconfigure them, you can actually have all systems at the same level, which is a monoculture. And that can be effective if there's effective security controls in place. However, if you have a software baseline that is insecure or old, which in many cases could be, say, hard to update, then unfortunately, you're actually pushing insecurity everywhere instead of having it only be localized in a subset of your system.
Right. So far, we've been talking about the global attack surface. I wanted to take a look at a particular section of the global attack surface, basically take a look at it from an industry viewpoint, which this report also does. When we look at the finance industry's attack surface, Matt, one of the biggest exposures that we see is something called IT and infrastructure exposures. What are these exposures?
IT and infrastructure exposures are very serious because they're associated with typically administrative interfaces for core IT and infrastructure components. So think about how an IT administrator would legitimately log into core networking routers of your company to perform service upgrades and other functions. That is a legitimate IT need for these services to exist. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, they can be deployed in insecure ways, such as having that administrative login be accessible to anyone on the public internet. And when that happens, it is extremely risky for organizations because, one, these assets are typically not monitorable in central ways, such as by installing an agent on them, but they also control very core business functionality, such as managing the enterprise networks of very large banks. And it's that kind of perfect storm that we see of both these being very high impact exposures and also being very prevalent. That's why this is most concerning for finance.
Right. And it's also interesting how unique the attack surface is across organizations. When we look at the attack surface of national governments, we see one of the majority of types of exposure in that particular organization be things associated with insecure file sharing and also database exposures. What are these sorts of exposures? And again, given these organizations, I'm assuming the data within them is going to be extremely crucial.
So as with all of our exposures, there are two primary risks of compromise for having such a system insecurely exposed on the public internet. One is that the exposure itself allows a toehold for attackers where they can then pivot laterally inside the organization. The second, more specific one is that exploitation of certain assets allows attackers direct control of all resources, in particular data that could be resident on the system itself. And for databases and file sharing systems, that second risk is particularly acute because of all of the data that is either stored on those systems or traverses those systems. So in the case of national governments in particular, there can be very sensitive data both about internal operations of the government, including in some cases even their national security apparatus, but it also includes potentially sensitive data about their citizens that will need to support things like tax returns and will need to file those, but want that data to be stored securely.
Mm-hmm. Right, thank you. For those of you that are watching and listening, we have breakdowns of several other types of organizations covered in this report. Unfortunately, on account of time, we won't be able to go in detail into all of them. So if you'd like to understand how your industry or your organization compares to the industry's attack surface, I'd highly recommend that you go and download this latest report. Again, you can find a copy of it in the resources section of this webinar, or you can go to paloaltonetworks.com and under Unit 42, you will find the latest 2023 Unit 42 attack surface threat report. Ross and Matt, we're almost at the end of this conversation. So for those of them who have been watching and listening to us so far and who are thinking about attack surface management, Ross, what are some recommendations you would give them in terms of how they can go ahead and start managing their attack surface more actively?
Sure. I think number one, in my days as a practitioner before I was a consultant, frankly, I was too scared to look oftentimes. I didn't want to know what was out there because, there was potentially so much. And the technology also wasn't there. And I think now with tools like Xpanse, we have that ability to, with high fidelity, attribute assets to organizations and assess, at least roughly, what their risk is in real terms that matter for your business bottom line. So don't be afraid to look. Use a tool that is high fidelity, high confidence that you trust. And if it's still too overwhelming, Unit 42, we offer a service called an attack surface assessment where we will basically kickstart this program for you. So we'll talk to you about your business and security concerns. We will use the data from Xpanse. We will fuse all of that with our threat intelligence and give you a curated report that you can then use to say, wow, we need to change these things right now. And maybe we need to build out a program longer term to make sure that these exposures don't happen again.
Thank you, Russ. Matt, what are your top 3 recommendations for someone who's considering attack surface management?
Number one, have a system to do complete current and accurate asset inventory. If you don't have visibility over your assets, especially those in the cloud where things can change every day, the entire rest of your security program is only going to be going after a fraction of the assets that you have. Second, both have a plan and have a program to actually do remediations effectively. Just because you have visibility over things, if you cannot actually effect changes and improve the security of what can be found that way, you're going to know that you have a bad day, but you're not going to be able to prevent it. And the third, to echo Ross's comment, is get the help you need if you don't have it already. There are changes and improve the security of what can be found that way. You're going to know that you have a bad day, but you're not going to be able to prevent it. And the third, to echo Ross's comment, is get the help you need if you don't have it already. There are available services both in-house at Palo Alto and then throughout the ecosystem to actually help you both understand and gain visibility, and then also track down and remediate issues. So those are the 3. Get visibility, be able to remediate, get help if you need it.
Excellent advice. Matt, Ross, thank you so much for taking the time and discussing the latest attack surface threat report with us. For those of you watching, like I said, we only covered a few of the major findings from this report. If you'd like to learn more, you can download the entire report from the resources section of this webinar. If you're not able to find it there, go to Palo Alto Networks and then to Unit 42, and you can download the report there. Thank you so much for taking the time and learning about how the global attack surface is changing and what you need to do to secure your attack surface. Thank you.
All right, great presentation. I learned a lot. It was really eye-opening. Thank you, Abhi, Ross, and Matt. It's now time for our Q&A session. Abhi, are you there? Ready for some questions? All right, excellent. Let's go. Let's see. First question I see for you here, Abhi, is how is attack surface management different from security ratings?
Fantastic question. We often hear this from our prospects and even some of our customers in terms of what use cases they can use attack surface management versus security ratings too. And the very honest answer is, if you are trying to solve some kind of compliance use case, let's say you are trying to solve for the cyber insurance use case where you need a score to go to a cyber insurance provider so that they can underwrite your cyber insurance premiums, by all means, please go with security ratings. That is pretty much the industry standard when it comes to being used as a anchor point to underwrite cyber insurance premiums. However, if you are trying to approach this as a security use case, if you're actually trying to manage, shrink, and control your attack surface, then we recommend that you go with attack surface management. For example, let's say you have an RDP instance that is publicly exposed to the internet in your environment. If you ran if you ran a security rating today and you didn't have the exposure, and you got, let's say, a 700 on 800 on your security rating, you would think, oh, this is great. My security posture is pretty good, and that gives you a sense of security. However, if tomorrow, if you have an RDP exposure, then there's no way to capture that in the security rating that you ran the previous day. However, with attack surface management, it would immediately catch that exposure, send you an alert and say, hey, this is the preferred medium for deployment of ransomware across many ransomware gangs. You have an exposure of this particular protocol on the public internet. You should probably go ahead and take this down. So those are the ways in which the use cases and the solutions differ.
Got it. Okay. Thank you for clearing that up. And I want to point out to everyone out there in the audience, if you have a question about attack surface management or Palo Alto Networks solution, now is the time to get it in. We're just going to do a Q&A here for a few minutes. Next question. This is a good one. What are internet-facing assets?
Internet-facing assets The way we define them here is in sort of broadly four key areas. It is your IP ranges and the different types of services that are running on those IP ranges that are connecting to the internet. It could be the different domains that your company owns, domains, the subdomains that your company owns, not just those of your company, but those of your subsidiaries and acquisitions. It could also be things like certificates in your environment. We have seen some high-profile incidents in the past year where a certificate has gone down and essentially taken an entire subdomain down, which in turn has had an impact on the company's revenue because they're no longer able to operate that particular website. So certificates, IP ranges, domains, and also all the different cloud assets are some of the ways in which you could think about internet-facing assets. If you go one level deeper, it could be things like your file transfer systems. We've seen many companies still use legacy file transfer systems that are exposed on the public internet, things like Telnet, things like unencrypted FTP. We've also seen, frankly, databases being exposed on the public internet. And nobody's doing this with any intent. A lot of these are showing up on the public internet because of accidental misconfigurations or exposures.
Yeah, great point. I bet companies have more internet-facing assets than ever before, whether they know it or not. Next question, they want to know what do playbooks available in the active response module do?
So the playbooks that are available in the active response module from Cortex Xpanse essentially solve lots of different use cases. But again, to give you the RDP example, if you had Cortex Xpanse, what would happen in that particular instance is once we had discovered this RDP instance, we would automatically deploy a playbook. This does not take any input from the analyst to basically go and find out 2 or 3 very important things about that particular exposure. And this is the most challenging part about resolving any exposure that we uncovered when we spoke to our customers. And those 3 things are: who owns this particular asset? What is the email address? Where do they sit in the company? What business unit do they belong to? The second thing is understanding the business impact of this particular exposure or the services that this particular exposure is connecting to. Is it in a prod environment? Is it in a dev environment? Is it in a test environment? And once you have these 2 contexts, we investigate and send you basically a ticket which says, hey, we found this exposure. Here's all the investigation that we've already done, and we have found who owns this, and we've also found that this is in a test environment. Do you want us to resolve it for you, or do you want us to send all of this information in a ticket so that somebody else in your organization can resolve it? Now, if the analyst is okay with us resolving this particular exposure, given that it's in a test environment, then given our integrations into their cloud service provider, so we have integrations into AWS, GCP, Azure, and a bunch of others, we can actually go into those cloud service providers and actually close down the port or change the security group settings to make sure that that exposure is no longer active. That's just one use case, but we can do that for over 700 types of incidents, many levels of just incident enrichment, and then making sure that when an analyst looks at the alert, they have all the context that they need and they don't have to do anything additional outside of just deciding if they want to fix it or if they want us to fix the issue for them.
Very nice. I love that rapid and automated response. This person's asking, does an analyst have to deploy the active response manually?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that question?
Yeah, they want to know, does an analyst have to deploy the active response manually?
No. So the active response module basically comes with our attack surface management platform, and the playbooks are automatically deployed once we have found that something. So we have 3 level types of alerts in the platform. So we have high or extremely critical alerts, and there's medium alerts, and then there's low priority alerts. So when we find alerts across any of these categories, we will go in and we will find the information around who owns this, what's the business context, where it's available, and we'll enrich, and then we will send it to the analyst. The analyst can decide whether they want to resolve something or if they're open to us going and resolving the issue on their behalf using our integrations. We have resolutions for about, I want to say 15 or 20 different use cases so far. So for those types of exposures, for example, RDP or telnet server, some OpenSSH insecurities, we can actually go and automatically resolve things once we find an issue. So the analyst has the ability to give an input saying, go ahead and resolve it. They don't have to deploy anything manually.
Got it. Okay. And here's a good question that just came in from Ben, and I think it kind of relates. He's wanting to know, do you all offer integrations with incident management systems to create alert tickets in the ITSM space, such as ServiceNow and Zendesk?
Yeah. So Xpanse basically has deep integrations with pretty much every single solution in the SOC workflow. So if you want to export the data and the context out of Xpanse and push it into your existing SOC information workflow, we have those integrations. We have out-of-the-box integrations with ServiceNow that was mentioned in that particular call. And I think we have one with Zendesk as well. So we have lots of different integrations that help you to essentially take the data and the context and then push it into whatever ITSM system that you're using.
Excellent. And then another question they want to know, is this a replacement for the VM program?
This is not a replacement for the VM program. A traditional VM program is IP-based, and it still has great insight internally into the organization. What we see customers use attack surface management is as a complement. So we see lots of people take Xpanse data, especially for cloud, increasing the accuracy of their cloud vulnerability management. They take Xpanse data, take data particularly about domain and host name pairs, put it into their VM to resolve it into an active IP, and then they're able to go and find whatever's there and then scan it for vulnerabilities. Now, if you try to do this without Xpanse, with a traditional VM solution, and traditional VM solutions are IP-based, and so by the time they get to the IP, the cloud asset would have moved and there's really nothing there. We had one customer who used Xpanse with their VM solution to essentially increase their cloud scanning accuracy from about 15% to 66% because they were now able to find more assets with the data that Xpanse had provided.
Wow, very impressive. Well, it looks like we're running out of time here in our Q&A session. Avi, I've learned a lot from you as well as from Ross and Matt. This has been a great session. Thank you so much for all your expertise on this topic.
Thank you so much for having us. And thank you for all the insightful questions.
Absolutely. And of course, a big thank you to Palo Alto Networks and Unit 42. I do want to remind everyone out there in the handouts tab, you can download the full Attack Surface Management for Dummies ebook. You can download that right there. It's 49 pages, so make sure that you download that. Super easy, one-click download. There's also the Unit 42 Attack Surface Management Threat Report that we talked about on today's webinar. Make sure you download that. It's a great resource, to kind of help you justify additional security budget dollars and solutions like we've been learning about on the webinar. So make sure that you check those out. And finally, the last link on the top, make sure you sign up for that upcoming event on uncovering advanced attack surface management happening on December 13th. So again, thank you to Palo Alto Networks, and thank you to all of our attendees for joining us, and thank you for the great questions. Before we go, some of you may be wondering who won that Amazon $250 gift card prize. The winner for that is Valerie Garcia from New Mexico. Congratulations. We'll be reaching out to you, as well as our best question prize winner. All right. I hope that everyone has learned a lot on the webinar today. I hope that you have a great day. Stay safe, protect your company and your company's critical data and applications, and take care. We'll see you on the next webinar. Bye-bye.